All right, guys, we are reading The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen, and we are now on part 5, which is called The Little Robber Maiden. And there she is. And now if you remember, Gerda has just left the prince and the princess, and she's going on to keep looking for her friend Kay. They drove through the dark, dark forest. The carriage shone like a torch, and unfortunately, its brightness attracted the eyes of robbers who dwelt in the forest shades. They could not bear it. "That is gold! Gold!" they cried. Forward they rushed, seized the horses, stabbed the outriders, coachman and footmen to death, and dragged little Gerda out of her carriage. "She is plump, she is pretty. She has been fed on nut kernels," said the old robber wife, who had a long bristly beard, and eyebrows hanging like bushes over her eyes. "She is like a little fat lamb, and how smartly she's dressed." And she drew out her bright dagger, glittering most terribly. "Oh, oh!" cried the woman, for at the very moment she had lifted her dagger to stab Gerda, her own wilful and wild daughter jumped upon her back and bit her ear violently. "You naughty child," said the mother. "She shall play with me," said the little robber maiden. "She shall give me her muff and her pretty frock and sleep with me in my bed." And then she bit her mother again, till the robber wife sprang up and shrieked with pain, while the robbers all laughed, saying, "Look at her playing with her young one." "I want to get in the carriage," said the little robber maiden. And so spoiled and wayward was she that she always had her own way. So she and Gerda sat together in the carriage, and drove over stubble and stone farther and farther into the wood. The little robber maiden was about as tall as Gerda, but much stronger. She had broad shoulders, and her eyes were almost black. They had an expression that was almost melancholy. She put her arms around Gerda's waist and said, "She shall not kill you so long as I love you. Are you a princess?" "No," said Gerda, and then she told her all that had happened to her, and how much she loved little Kay. The robber maiden looked earnestly in her face, shook her head, and said, "She shall not kill you, even if I do quarrel with you. Then indeed I would rather do it myself." And she dried Gerda's tears, and put both her hands into the pretty muff that was so soft and warm. The carriage at last stopped in the middle of the courtyard of the robber's castle. This castle was half ruined. Crows and ravens flew out in the openings, and some fearfully large bulldogs, looking as if they could devour a man in a moment, jumped round the carriage. They did not bark, for that was forbidden. The maidens entered a large smoky hall, where a tremendous fire was blazing on the stone floor. The smoke rose up to the ceiling, seeking a way of escape, for there was no chimney. A large cauldron full of soup was boiling over the fire, while hares and rabbits were roasting on the spit. "You shall sleep with me and my little pets tonight," said the robber maiden. Then they had some food, and afterwards went to a corner where there were blankets and straw. Nearly 100 pigeons were perched on the rafters above them. They seemed to be asleep, but were startled when the little maidens approached. "These all belong to me," said Gerda's companion, and seizing hold of one of the nearest, she held the poor bird by the feet and swung it about. "Kiss it," said she, flapping it into Gerda's face. "The rabble from the wood sit up here," she continued, pointing to a number of bars fastened across a hole in the wall. "Those are wood pigeons. They would fly away if I did not keep them shut up. And here is my old favorite." She pulled forward by the horn a reindeer. who wore a bright copper ring around his neck, to which he was tied to a very large stone. We have to chain him up, or he would run away. Every evening I tickle his neck with my sharp dagger. That frightens him." And the robber maiden drew out a long dagger from a crack in the wall and ran it over the reindeer's throat. The poor animal struggled and kicked, but the girl laughed, and then she pulled Gerda into her bed. "Will you keep the dagger in your hand while you sleep?" asked Gerda, looking timidly at the dangerous plaything. "I always sleep with my dagger by my side," replied the little robber maiden. "One never knows what may happen. But now tell me all over again what you told me before about Kay, and the reason for your coming into the wide world all by yourself." And Gerda again related her story. The wood pigeons, imprisoned above, listened, while the other pigeons slept. The little robber maiden threw one arm round Gerda's neck, and holding a dagger with the other, was soon fast asleep. You have a picture here. There's Gerda, and there's the little little robber girl, and she's holding a pigeon by its feet. Pigeon doesn't look very happy about it. Gerda could hear her heavy breathing, but she herself could not close her eyes throughout the night. She knew not what would become of her, whether she would even be suffered to live. The robbers sat round the fire drinking and singing. Oh, it was a dreadful night for the poor little girl. Then spoke the wood pigeons. "Coo, coo, coo, we have seen little Kay. A white fowl carried his sledge. He himself was in the Snow Queen's chariot, which passed through the wood while we sat at our nests. She breathed upon us young ones as she passed, and all died of her breath except two. Coo, coo." "What are you saying?" cried Gerda. "Where was the Snow Queen going? Do you know anything about it?" "She travels most likely to Lapland, where ice and snow lay all year round. Ask the reindeer bound to the rope there." "Yes, ice and snow all through the year. It is a glorious land," said the reindeer. "There, free and happy, one can roam through the wide sparkling valley. There the Snow Queen has her summer tent. Her strong castle is very far off, near the North Pole, on the island called Spitzbergen." And here's little Gerda with the robber girl asleep almost on top of her. "Oh, Kay, dear Kay," sighed Gerda. "You must lie still," said the robber maiden, "or I will thrust my dagger into your side." When morning came, Gerda repeated to her what the wood pigeons had said, and the little robber maiden looked grave for a moment, then nodded her head, saying, "No matter, no matter. Do you know where the Lapland is?" she asked of the reindeer. "Who should know but I?" returned the animal, his eyes kindling. "There was I born and bred. There how often I have bounded over wild icy plains." "Listen to me," said the robber maiden to Gerda. "You see all our men are gone. My mother is still here and will remain, but towards noon she will drink a little out of her great flask, and after that she will sleep, and then I will do something for you." And so saying, she jumped out of bed, sprung upon her mother, pulled her by the beard, and said, "My own dear Mom, good morning." And the mother caressed her so roughly that she was red and blue all over. However, it was meant lovingly. When her mother was fast asleep, the robber maiden went to the reindeer and said, "I should have great pleasures in stroking you a few more times with my sharp dagger. For then you look so droll, but never mind. I will unloose your chain and help you to escape, on condition that you run as fast as you can to Lapland, and take this little girl to the castle in the Snow Queen, where her playfellow is. You must have heard her story, for she speaks loud enough, and you know well how to listen." The reindeer bounded with joy, and the robber maiden lifted Gerda onto his back, taking the precaution to bind her on firmly as well, and gave her a little cushion to sit on. "And here," said she, "are your fur boots. You will need them in that cold country. The muff I must keep myself. It is too pretty to part with, but you shall not be frozen. Here are my mother's huge gloves. They reach up to the elbow. Put them on. Now your hands look as clumsy as my old mother's." And Gerda shed tears of joy. "I cannot bear to see you crying," said the little robber maiden. "You ought to look glad. See, here are 2 loaves and a piece of bacon for you, that you may not be hungry on the way." She fastened these supplies on the reindeer's back, opened the door, called away the great dogs, and then, cutting with her dagger the rope which bound the reindeer, shouted to him, "Now then, run! But take good care of the little girl." And Gerda stretched out her hands to the robber maiden and bade her farewell, and the reindeer sped through the forest, over stubble and stone, over desert and heath, over meadow and moor. The wolves howled and the ravens shrieked, "Ish! Ish!" A red light flashed. One might have fancied the sky was sneezing. "Those are my dear old northern lights," said the reindeer. "Look at them, how beautiful they are." And he ran faster than ever. Night and day he ran. The loaves were eaten, so was the bacon, and at last they were in Lapland. Part 6. The Lapland Woman and the Finland Woman. Little Gerda. They stopped at a little hut. A wretched hut it was. The roof very nearly touched the ground, and the door was so low that whoever wished to go in or out was obliged to crawl upon hands and knees. No one was at home except for an old Lapland woman, who was busily boiling fish over an oil lamp. The reindeer related to her Gerda's whole story, though not till after he had made her acquainted with his own, which appeared to him to be of much more importance. Poor Gerda, meanwhile, was so overcome by the cold that she could not speak. "Ah, poor thing," said the Lapland woman. "You have still a long way before you. You have 100 miles to go before you reach Finland. The Snow Queen dwells there and burns blue lights every evening. I will write for you a few words on a piece of dried fish stock, for I have no paper. And you may take it with you to the wise Finland woman who lives there. She will advise you better than I can." So when Gerda had well warmed herself and taken some food, the Lapland woman wrote a few words on dried stockfish, bade Gerda take care of it, and bound her once more firmly on the reindeer's back. Onward they sped. The wondrous northern lights, now of the loveliest, brightest blue color, shone all through the night, and amidst the splendid illuminations they arrived in Finland, and knocked at the chimney of the wise woman, for she didn't have a door. Hot, very hot was it inside, so much so that the wise woman wore scarcely any clothing. She was low in stature and very dirty. She immediately undid little Gerda's clothes, took off her fur boots and thick gloves, laid a piece of ice on the reindeer's head, and then read what was written on the stockfish. She read it 3 times, and after the 3rd reading she knew it by heart, so she threw the fish into the porridge pot, for it would make an excellent supper, and she never wasted anything. The reindeer then repeated his own story, and when that was finished he told of little Gerda's adventures, and the wise woman twinkled her wise eyes, but spoke not a word. "You are so powerful," continued the reindeer, "that I know you can twist all the winds of the world into a thread, so that when the captain undoes one knot, he will have a favorable wind, while if he has Well, if he undoes the second, it will blow sharp. And if he undoes the third, so tremendous a storm will arise that the trees of the forest would be uprooted, and the ship wrecked. Will you not mix for this little maiden that wonderful draught, which will give her the strength of 12 men, and thus enable her to overcome the Snow Queen?" "The strength of 12 men," repeated the wise woman. That would be of much use for sure." And she walked away, drew forth a large parchment roll from a shelf, and began to read. What strange characters were seen inscribed on the scroll, as the wise woman slowly unrolled it. She read so intently that the perspiration ran down her forehead. But the reindeer pleaded so earnestly for little Gerda, and Gerda's eyes were raised so entreatingly and tearfully, that at last the wise woman's eyes began to twinkle again, out of sympathy, and she drew the reindeer into a corner, and putting a fresh piece of ice on his head, whispered this: "Little Kay is still with the Snow Queen, in whose abode everything is according to his taste, and therefore he believes it to be the best place in the world. But that is because he has a glass splinter in his heart and a glass splinter in his eye. Until he has got rid of them, he will never feel like a human being, and the Snow Queen will always maintain her influence over him. But can you not give little Gerda something to take, so that she will have the power to overcome all of these evil influences?" "I can give her no power so great as that which she possesses. Don't you see how strong she is? Don't you see how both men and animals want to serve her, a poor little girl, wandering barefoot through the world? Her power is greater than ours. It comes from her heart, from her being a loving and innocent child. If this power which she already possesses cannot give her access to the Snow Queen's palace, and enable her to free Kay's eye and his heart from the glass fragments, we can do nothing for her. 2 miles hence is the Snow Queen's garden. Carry the little maiden there, put her down close by the bush bearing red berries in the snow. Lose no time and hasten back here." And there's the little bush with the berries. And the wise woman lifted Gerda on the reindeer's back, and away they went. "Oh, I have left my boots behind! I have left my gloves behind!" cried little Gerda when it was too late. The cold was piercing, but the reindeer dared not stop. On he ran until he reached the bush with red berries. Here he set Gerda down, kissed her, the tears rolling down his cheek, and ran fast back again, as he had been told to do. And there stood poor Gerda, without shoes, without gloves, in the middle of winter, alone in that barren country, the terrible icy cold Finland. See, her little bare feet in the snow are very cold. She ran on as fast as she could. A whole regiment of snowflakes came to meet her. They did not fall from the sky, which was cloudless and bright with the northern lights, but ran straight along the ground, and the nearer she came, the bigger they grew. Gerda then remembered how large and curious the snowflakes had appeared the time she had looked at them through the magnifying glass. These, however, were very much larger. They were alive. They were, in fact, the Snow Queen's guards. Their shapes were the strangest that could be imagined. Some looked like great ugly porcupines, others like snakes rolled into knots with their heads peering out, and others like little fat bears with bristling hair. All, however, were dazzling white, for all were living snowflakes. Little Gerda began to pray, and so fierce was the cold that she could see her own breath escaping from her mouth and ascending into the air like vapor. The cold grew more intense, the vapor more dense, until it took the form of a little bright angel, which went on glowing